Kroth differs from Aru in that Kroth is sort of the hammer and anvil approach, where a lot of their siege troops are a little bit more mobile, where Aru is the complete opposite. They have this polarity between having a bunch of hyper-aggressive, fragile troops combined with some very, very positional tools that like to entrench into an area.
So Mala and Zol are these two really iconic characters that really hammer home sort of the twin spirits of what it is to be Aru. Mala can sacrifice her own units to radically increase healing in a given area, and her Bloodwell structure can actually harvest the life force of units that die nearby, giving her Pyre and sort of building up to her transcendent ult ability, which literally makes the sky bring blood. So Zol, on the other hand, embodies the more predatory hunter elements of Aru. She swaps out the masked hunter for this sort of super stalker, this bone stalker, that brings stealth combat and ambushing into the early game in a really compelling way. All of her units can see into the fog of war a bit. They have that sort of tremor sense, or that sort of sixth hunter's sense that really lets a skilled Zol player be one step ahead of the opponent at any given time.
Definitely the most exciting thing about Aru will be their contrasting playstyle, where they're going to have a lot of fragile troops that are very mobile, and you're able to run around the map pretty effectively with more of a hit and run and ambush style, skulking around the map, finding targets of opportunity, and they're able to follow it with Aru's ability to just completely lock down and entrench into an area with their roots.
So what's really cool about Rootway is that it's a very visual representation of the Arus and their goddesses' influence encroaching on the battlefield. And there's some really cool visual effects that we're working on to really deliver that fantasy.
The Aru has lower mana regeneration than most factions do when they're off Rootway. And then they want to make sure they're on Rootway to make sure they have extra mana regeneration. So they're really tied to making sure they want to come back and stay on their Rootway whenever they want to have their maximum mana regeneration for their casters, which kind of ties into them being able to cast from life if they ever find themselves in a situation without mana. As another part of their gameplay, they have an overshield, which regenerates very, very quickly, but only once they haven't been fighting for a little bit. So when their Aru troops are on the Rootway, they regenerate their shields a lot faster.
I think one of the really cool sort of workhorse units we have in Immortal is the Underspine, which really it's similar to the Magi in the sense that it kind of turns on the rest of your early compositions, but it scales really well into the late game. And what's cool about it is it's a deploy-only unit, so it can move around, and then when you deploy it, becomes hidden and starts attacking things. Basically, it's this nasty hermit crab bobbit worm creature that will just really mangle anything that gets too close to it while providing rootway for your forces.
Where the Underspine represents the positional nature of the Root Witches, the Aru, the Bloodbound is the complete opposite. This is the assassin, or more mobile force in the Aru, where they are very fragile, but they are glass cannons and have extreme damage, and they are also able to teleport someone. And whenever you've teleported somewhere, if there's a unit that you've teleported right on top of, they basically get nuked and assassinated for a crazy amount of damage.
I think people are going to love how Aru soldiers and warriors and hunters look and kind of stand out as this sort of living predatory foliage or sort of treant people. We have some really iconic characters, shapes, and sort of textures and palettes that we're kind of bringing to the fore in a way that I don't think any other strategy game has done. So we're definitely treading on unique ground here.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to maybe you hearing my voice. We have some progress in the chat. We can now hear dulcet tones. Sorry, these are supposed to be shrieking and awful tones. I'll be working on that for next time. Try to bring the dulcetness down. My name is Tom Jack Labonte. I am the user experience, user interface lead at Sunspirit Games. With me is Dylan Kahn, leader of Creative Things. Dylan, talk to me about Mala, and how amazing and exciting it is to finally get to show this stuff off to everybody.
Yeah, so we were saying before there are technical difficulties that this is the first time we've seen everything come together and see Mala's manifestation and casting animation, and wow, I am floored. I'm very excited, along with everyone else here. A lot of time and effort went into making this a reality. So to see all of the pieces kind of come together at last is just fantastic.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We do have some questions in the chat about Travis. Travis has been swallowed into the Herlesh void. He's somewhere on Zur. We don't know quite where, so we're gonna have to do some excavation. But I'm sure
he's
that
continuing
you'll
the
see
work
him soon.
Yeah,
he is continuing. He's discarding death and continuing the work.
Yep.
Yeah,
he's
shrugging
gotten
it
very
off his
good at it.
shoulders.
Yep, he's gotten very good at that.
I think at this point, one Travis cycle is about 4 hours sleep and 18 hours of work. So I mean,
well, right, and the fact that he's now co-working with Herlesh means that he gets to bend and fold time, so he gets to increase multiple cycles. It's not quite Travis clones. We haven't achieved that level of power yet, but we are getting about 5 Travises worth of work out of him.
And to be fair, once we do get to Travis cloning, we can just basically skip the whole process of trying to gather energy from stars at that point, because we could just clone Travi.
Yep. Travi is the ultimate unit of energy and productivity in the universe.
Yeah. Certainly.
We should probably talk about the stuff on the screen.
Sure, we would love to talk about. Oh my god, I just saw a death animation for the for the ether extractor.
Oh yeah,
which I forget the proper name from, because I keep using the class name.
The Ethermaw.
Ethermaw, there it is. I love that. Ethermaw
He
is actually
one hungry boy.
He's just, in a faction full of like dark and metally hunter predatory. The Ethermaw is just hanging out. He's having a good time. He's like,
he has a good job.
Easiest job in the base. I'm just gonna sit here and burp ether out.
Yeah, it's good. Good personality.
Shout out to Melody. I believe that was Melody's concept.
Oh yeah, the Melody touch.
The Melody touch. Somehow combining cuteness and blood gods into one magical.
I mean, she did it once with the symbiote, and then she got a two-peat with the Ethermaw. So how's this working? How's the format working for this?
Well, we are now officially in the question and answer section of the show. So folks in the chat, there's 53 of you. My God! First of all, thank you for coming. This is a great turnout for us. Really appreciate you guys hanging out. I'm sure you've got questions, because we don't tell you everything. So if you've got a question, we'd love to hear it. Our first question, very important question, critical, serious question, comes from Wilson109. What is the collective noun for a group of Travi? Right.
Oh.
Right.
Well, it depends. If it's on sprint, it's Traverai. If it's off sprint, which never happens, it's just Travis, because he hasn't cloned himself yet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. We're pretty much an on sprint company. We're just, some people think long distance running, you just go slow to conserve your energy. We just sprint the whole thing. We just sprint it to the end. That works, right? Zero problems there.
Yep.
Zero problems at all. Our next question comes in from Mr. Hydralisk. What is the role of the Zakal?
So the Zakal is effectively an analog to, it's a heavy melee unit with scaling damage versus armored. It's ground to ground only. So perhaps the best analog in terms of strategy would be like a Marauder. The relationship is a little less sharp and a little bit more of an emphasis on more close range. They have a really neat passive where they effectively get a first strike in the early game, and that will likely be expanded through researches later, where they have a passive where they are able to shoot a round at a much greater range than their normal attack range.
Hell yeah. And we're seeing some of the Zakal on screen right now. Spiky boy, lots of spikes, power, scariness. Fantastic, dude. Next question is coming in from Foxy Mayhem. What does the bark of an under spine taste like? Interesting. I think it's going to be it's going to change depending on whether you're just kind of chewing on it or you're making it into like a tea.
Yeah, it's going to be very earthy.
Yeah.
And then there's going to be a little bit of like a metallic tang, and then your body will get paralyzed because it's a pretty nasty creature.
Yeah, human beings not gonna be able to handle that very well, certainly. Question from Bigelow Jones: can you explain the Aru in the amber of the Zakal? That is one of the really cool aspects I like about the unit design.
Yeah. So the neat thing about Aru is they have a number of different kinds of units, and you have your base sort of Aru warriors that are physically conditioned, raised to be excellent hunters, and then you have these sort of root beasts kind of on the other side of the spectrum, things that have been either taken from Nuoth's biosphere and converted into useful elements of the ecosystem or the militarized ecosystem of the god tree. And then you have this sort of in between the two, which is where the Zakal and the Resonant and a few other units across Aru are going to kind of be represented as. And these are effectively Aru that have fallen in battle or fallen in pursuit of the hunt and have been reconstituted and reborn by the god tree. And so you can actually see this mangled or this wounded Aru that has been resuscitated and revived and pressed back into service.
That's wild. You can kind of see a little bit of there. We're getting a lot of Zakal shots on the stream right now. Awesome. Next question. Coming in from Drago Blaster 5. By the way, Drago Blaster 5 has probably asked a question at like every single one of these that we've ever done. I'm pretty sure. You may have missed one, Drago, but we really appreciate all your questions. What faction, Drago asks, will have the first splash siege unit like a lurker, siege tank, or reaver?
That will almost certainly be the Aru at this point. The Resonant is about as close to a classic deployed siege unit in strategy as you can get. It doesn't have the same sort of insane range of the siege tank, but you can get kind of close if you deploy them on routeway. But yeah, deploy mode, longer range, and splash damage. That's the Resonant, and that's currently in concept right now.
Oh man, that's gonna change. It's gonna change everything. We only have 4 units in the build right now, but everyone's been playing Aru and having a pretty fantastic time in general. So very, very pumped about that to continue to get more units now that we've finally begun this multi-faction video game. Big moment for us getting to this point. Very, very exciting. Next question is coming from Foxy Mayhem again. Do we know how the symbiote originally started being symbiotic with their god tree?
Not exactly the origins. They are not native to Nuoth. They did come with Luculathon along with the Underspine. And they are thought to go way, way back. So wherever Luculathon originally came from, Luculathon was probably a distinct species of sort of ecosystem expanding trees, and they were probably her original pollinators.
Beginners. The beginners of it all, most likely.
Definitely
Mr.
got in on the
Hydelus.
ground floor.
Certainly. Mr. Hydelus asks, do Aru forcefully corrupt or infest their enemies in a way, or do they just kill them?
Yeah, so it's not anything like Zerg or the Flood or any of these other sort of like aggressive sort of expansionistic elements. The Aru and Luculathon's ecosystem encompass things by preying upon it, taking their genome and their sort of body plans, and then kind of over time finding a use for it in the ecosystem, kind of naturally. So, and the interesting thing is the blood and the physical material will often incorporate elements of the memory of the constituent parts of the beings that were sacrificed or consumed. And so you'll get these weird. If anyone's seen Annihilation, that kind of cult classic science fiction movie, it's kind of like that, where these sort of eerie reconstructions of these animals and plants kind of emerge centuries later after either being hunted to extinction or just disappearing or being displaced as key members and players in this ecosystem, which is self-sufficient.
Hell yeah. All right. Next question comes from Shining 118. I'm assuming that's lumens. Pretty bright. The Aru have a Protoss-like tech tree. What are the prongs? Twilight, Robo, Stargate, etc.
Yeah, so the three are Amber Womb, which is where you have your heavy, nasty ground beasties. So this is where the Resonant comes from, where the Ichor comes from, which is this awful lizard hyena pack hunter that runs around and vomits on things, kind of pre-digests them for Lukulathon. You have the Resonant, of course, which is the heavy-hitting siege unit and an area control unit. And then lastly, you have the dropship, which is currently slated to be a permanently burrowed kind of stealth dropship, kind of a worm creature. So that's one. Then there is the sort of the Bloodfane, which is kind of like an analog to a Templar Archives. That's where the Red Seer is, and if you're playing Mala, the Dread Sister Vanguard that replaces the Red Seer at the very top of the tech tree. And the Bloodbound is also fully unlocked by tech there. Though I believe you can get the Bloodbound a little bit earlier with one of those sort of Citadel or Twilight Council analog tech structures. And then lastly, there's the Bone Canopy, and that's where your flyers are unlocked. So that is the Aurochs, which is sort of a Scourge / skill shot Baneling kind of creature that serves as anti-splash, anti-air, as well as a dislodging element where you can have them dive bomb targets, which is going to be wild. And then you have the Behemoth, which is a massive dedicated dislodger skirmisher unit that fires tons of Queedle, which are these small little nasty ankle vomiter things. They're kind of like an infested Terran. They're very slow, but they're a ranged unit, so you can kind of shotgun a small squad at siege range, up to 6 or 8, depending on upgrade status and balance. And then yeah, well, there's a few other things, but we need a little bit more testing to see if they're going to have a place in the RO kit. So
great, thank you for that. Actually answered the question by Silent Raven 127. What kind of air units will Aru have? Just talked about them a bunch. Hope you enjoyed.
Oh, I forgot the Thrum. The Thrum's like the coolest one.
Ooh, also the Thrum.
Yeah, so the Thrum is early on. It's an air superiority. It's somewhere between an air superiority fighter and a gunship. It's the closest analog would be the Mutalisk. It's incredibly fast and microble. It is one of the most clumpable air units in Immortal. So and it has a really neat passive where if a unit dies within a certain range of them, they basically will become frenzied, and they will have a massively increased, attack speed, and probably a little bit of movement speed as well. So you can, and it's on a fairly long cooldown. But so it's one of those like they're these little flying knives that you're kind of jockeying around with and looking for sweet kills, and then you can go on a spree, and then you tear off and wait for them to get bloodthirsty again. So yeah, they're a ton of fun, and that's one of the units that just is just, I think, ready for modeling. It just got its first model block out. So
actually, the whole model block out was done on the art stream yesterday.
Yeah, that's right.
I actually watched it go from like a lump of clay to the unit, and
yeah,
it is
Matthew's awesome.
Such a cool process to watch, man.
Yeah, Matthew's a consummate professional.
Yeah,
danger flap flaps
in the chat. Appreciate
Tempo,
it.
yeah, Tempo is correct. They're not mighty flap flaps, but they are flap flaps. They're danger flap flaps.
Yeah. The play pattern is a little bit different because they don't have the consistent damage output that the Muta has. they have this oscillating intensity of like, okay, and they get frenzy, do a ton of damage, and then they're less weak, less strong, right?
Yep.
So it'll be less of a constant threat, and we found that it really improves the gameplay cycle, especially for the person playing against the mutas, which can be annoying.
Yeah.
Cool. So the next question is, how much of its former life is Zakal able to remember? So the dude inside the amber.
I mean,
Do
given
that.
that these, same with the resonant. All reborn units are. It's a little complicated. Your mileage may vary. You know, traumatic head injuries tend to do poorly for memories, but more than you would expect. So in general, what's interesting about the Sylvan species and its sort of subspecies with the Iratek, the Aru, and the Yule, is they are evolutionarily selected to be able to transfer memories and experiences between generations. It's just part of the selection pressures that drove their development as a successful species on Nuoth. Because Nuoth is a hard place to grow up. It is a place of extreme climactic events. You know, there's literally shallow seas that have 100 lightning strikes per minute all year round because the climate currents are the air currents, the topography is just really screwed up, and it's a place of hyperpredation. So intelligent societies that have developed have to have very well developed tools to pass on necessary information in an environment that is actively hostile to written learning. So the Sylv have this property that Lakulathon has been very happy to take advantage of, and basically is like, oh, great! So your greatest warriors or your have pushed themselves beyond their limits. I'm going to just take them and learn from them, and then kind of reinvest those memories and experiences into a warframe that will be even more effective at doing what I want them to do, which is to go out and kill things. So they can remember. They're an interesting reborn, including the Zakal, are this interesting hybrid of the individual that they once were. But they are the closest thing. Talking to a reborn is usually the closest thing an Aru gets to directly communing with the god tree herself, and the closest that she gets to speaking directly out of, say, like the prophets. Oh,
Cool. We do have another question from Atira. Medevacs are awesome. I think they're the best transport unit ever. How many different types of medevacs can I expect in Immortal? I think
I mean, one for every faction.
one for every faction. I mean, I was thinking Aerotech should have two. I think two is probably a good, because they're going to be doing some bullshit. So
Oh yeah. Well, so Iratek have entirely different BS. So they're, I mean, like Sylvan's like factions in general like have heavy shenanigans. Like the Karoth Chariot is like a big expensive premium dropship that can drop a large amount of army capacity into a fight, and they also do have, I believe, they do have ranged pickup, which is kind of cool. The gimmick for Aru, of course, is it's stealthy. It's a sneaky one. It's a hidden dropship, so you have to get pretty much right on top of it to stab that nasty worm. But it gets into places that aren't necessarily. You have to be extra vigilant with against Aru because they have a chance. They're like sand. They'll just wherever there's an opportunity, there's going to be some masked hunters, being annoying. The Iratek one is basically it's currently the dev name is the Enkindler because it used to be a Urian unit. But it is cool because it is kind of like a medevac. It will heal units inside of it at a slow but steady pace. So you can kind of keep your forces topped off. But it doesn't actively contribute to your fighting capacity in a fight.
Oh man, I can't wait
Yeah,
for all our different weird dropship ideas.
The sooner that tech will let us actually implement and start properly concepting these guys, have the happy ROP. Please, tech, one time.
Yeah. Yeah, so the stealth system and the transport system are big tech things that need to get done. So Drago Blaster does ask, how close are we to revealing the first transport unit? I think we're a bit too far out to make an estimate for you right now. There's just too much other things that we
It's a long
need to
list.
prioritize.
It
Yeah,
turns out making a game has a lot of steps.
there's a
I
lot
learned
of
this.
components and they're easy
I
to
learned this for the
forget.
first time every day for the last like 2 years.
Same. Yep. All right. Thank you so much for the question. Trago Blaster, Burrow Dropship. Yep. What is the most Zerg-like faction gameplay-wise?
I mean, like it kind of depends. There's 3 factions that have strong Zerg elements. I think the biggest, like in terms of like certainly this, if you're looking and judging a faction's Zerg factor by how swarmy it is, Herlesh is going to be probably the swarmiest faction that we ever make. Currently, like what I'm pushing for is not only a batch hatch tier 1 melee unit like a Zergling analog, but also a ranged generalist that also hatches in pairs. That would be awesome. Just flooding the battlefield with tons of disposable units that are actually like intended to die. The cool thing about Herlesh is all of their low tier units, when they die, they release what's called miasma, which is a very slow damage over time for enemy units, but it roids out the rest of your army, and they get contextual bonuses that make them kill better. So a close second though is Aru, and Aru is this weird blend of Terran and Zerg playstyles. It's Zerg in the sense that it's incredibly aggressive, and they have a few sort of similar dislodging units to Zerg. But they're definitely a unique blend. They have their base unit is a ranged generalist unit, so like a Warcraft archer or a marine. They're very agile, and they have this sort of positional element that Travis said in the video, in the overview video, where they have these anchor points that they deploy that are very expensive to tack into, and from there they kind of make these little sorties into the enemy base or into vulnerable positions and harass and harry and attack. The third one would be Jorah, which is oddly enough, like just in terms of strict mechanics, has some Zerg-like elements. They do have a massable, pretty swarmy melee unit at tier 1 that's backed up by something that, for lack of a better term, might be like best compared to, I guess, a Hydralisk with Stim. Though the Riveteer is a little bit different than that. Anyway, but those would be sort of if you're looking for, like, it kind of depends, like what you're looking for. I'd say Herlesh followed by Aru, if you're looking to scratch that Zerg itch.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much for the question. Drago Blaster asks, are there any updates in business development / funding?
We cannot share anything at this time.
Cannot confirm nor
If
deny
you are,
any activities in business
if you are
development.
I can say this: if you're an accredited investor, reach out, and you want to be part of this. You can always reach out to our business development team. The info is on the website.
Mhm.
We're always happy to talk. People who are excited. So yeah, we're always happy to have that conversation, but we can't say anything here.
Yeah, business development stuff is always going to come out through an official channel at the right time with the marketing behind it and all those other types of thing. So you will know what's occurring as long as you're attached to at least one of our social medias, and it looks like you're at least attached to Twitch. So we'll be letting you guys know as soon as we possibly can tell you. But the nature of business development updates are that they're strategic, and it turns out that you want to be smart with your strategy and take your time, and you want to scout your opponents and all that good stuff. So that's what we're doing. We're playing the good strategy game. The game of making the video game is currently being won. Bachlips asks, what are the Yule up to at the moment? I actually read this verse as, what are Yule up to at the moment? And I thought that was hilarious, but
Yep.
not enough to actually make a joke out of, just to explain that I had the thought of the joke and then
All
pass the
y'all.
question to Dylan.
Yeah, so the Yule are on a different continent that's fairly isolated. So Motslan and the continent of the Iratek are literally right next to each other. They are separated by a channel that's about 100, 150, 200 miles. So it's a hop, skip, and a jump. It is a little complicated because there's multiple like active volcanoes in between them that are quite large, and large sections of it are in a state of permanent thunderstorm. So crossing is a little tricky. The Yule are way, way off, and the Sylve that would eventually become the Iratek migrated through a series of sort of intervening like island chains and like microcontinents to settle in this general area. So the Yule are just kind of doing their thing as they have for thousands of years, happily recording the events of the world and generally being chill, happy little time druids. We'll see how long that lasts, though.
Ominous things always on the future in creation. Cressycum asks, how much will blood play a role in Aru abilities, and will there be blood rain?
There will be blood. So Mala is the prophet of the blood. She is a sort of supercaster, and blood is a pretty omnipresent resource throughout the entire faction. So instead of energy or mana or charge or other stuff, other resources that other factions might have, they have something that naturally replenishes more slowly. It's their blood pool, which is sort of the excess ambient blood that's in their body that they can draw from without hurting themselves. The interesting thing about the Aru blood system is when they do not have blood on hand in their pool, they can just draw directly from their own hit points at a 1-for-1 basis, 1-to-1 exchange rate. So you can very much redline your army. Interestingly enough, Mala is very good at taking blood out of certain individuals and putting them into other individuals. You can sacrifice a friendly unit to create this sort of blood geyser that replenishes HP of your units in an area very quickly, and it even works with temporary or summoned units like the Queedle, which are not long for this world anyway. So you can kind of set up a deal and go with this sort of wombo combo. Or if a unit is about to die, you can kind of cull it and flip the script and maybe win that fight when you would have to retreat instead. Her ultimate does in fact tear open literally the realms between worlds into Lukulathan's like ecosystem, and in the ecosystem, the hydrosphere is more like a sanguinosphere. It literally rains blood there, and so it just unleashes a giant monsoon of blood onto the battlefield, which supercharges your casters. Well, all friendly casters.
Oh, nice. So if I have Karath, it'll supercharge my magic
Yeah.
as well.
You can supercharge you can start chain casting with Sharu. You can do a lot of busted things during the duration of Rain of Blood.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that I'm excited and thinking about the most is the different combinations of immortals and factions that people are able to do and find stupid broken combos that we didn't foresee and have to nerf.
I mean, that's the point. Like that's a
Yeah.
feature
Yeah.
for me.
Shining118 asks, which race will leave the most fire to stand in? Lingering AoE.
Oh, well, that's going to be so the most. So Jor's going to be your first taste of setting up do not go the floor is lava zones with the grease fire, which is probably my favorite.
Oh,
Like,
man.
I mean, I love the dervish, but grease fire has my heart. The dumb shenanigans you're going to be able to pull off with squads of those units are just how aggravating it's going to be to face those. I'm very excited. But for like, I want to burn the entire map down to embers and slagged ruins. That's going to be Uriah, which is the sister faction of Karath. That's definitely where you're going to want. You're going to want to invest your time.
Vengeful fiery angels.
Yep, Burning
They're
Advent
fantastic.
coming
Yes.
soon to a very unfortunate solar system near you.
Thanks for the question, Shining 118. Mr. Hydeless asks, As sister factions, how do Aru and Iratek differ regarding gameplay style?
So Iratek has a lot more bullshit going on. Colloquially speaking, very technical term actually. So Aru is interesting in that even though it has this interesting trident structure that definitely lets you do some interesting like tech timings and whatnot, just because you can get like air units earlier than other factions. The Iratek really lean into that structure and how much you can use it. So they have still, they're a sister faction. So they still will have a ranged generalist at tier 1, and they will have, a certain sort of supporting element at tier 1.5 that is, somewhat positional. They will operate on in similar principles to Aru, but they are a lot less aggressive and a lot less like they're a lot less like proactive in the like I'm constantly going to try to hunt and harry and like get you. The way Iratek gets you is they're built on unit synergies. So StarCraft 2 Protoss is a very frustrating example of this. We're approaching Iratek where if they kind of pull together and execute correctly, they will get to bend or break rules that other factions have to respect in the early to mid game, including things like retreatability and lethality. However, there's very clear ways to block that execution and greatly reduce their ability to break or bend those rules. So, like, I wouldn't call them gimmicks, but they're definitely like they're a different take on combined arms than say like Jorah. But the payoff is you get these. It's like you're conducting this sort of choreographed dance of death, and the payoff is you obliterate the enemy army. If you get all the violins and all the percussion instruments to work in that beautiful harmony.
Next question is Quast asks, what race will have the most potential for cheese? Wacky tactics. I believe we just talked about this. The
Iratek.
technical term for that is bullshit.
Yep.
And Iratek will have a book.
Yeah,
They will have a
Iratek
book.
will have a book. Okay.
Maybe a couple books.
Yeah. So Jorah is gonna have a book, and there's gonna be an epic mini series for Karoth. Or sorry, for Iratek. Though keep in mind each faction, like once Karoth is going to feel a lot more tricky and annoying and dangerous once Resh like enters the fray. Resh definitely has the tools to do some really nasty timings and really punish like greedy play. Decker is a class action lawsuit in frustration waiting to happen. He has one of my favorite abilities, which is fairly cheap and most of the time will literally do nothing and will often win games because it does nothing.
That's
some
very
roadie brain,
interesting.
galaxy brain, 5D chess.
I'm mega curious right now. I think we're going to leave that curiosity hanging out. I think it's a good thing.
Yep.
Next question. Shining118. Thank you for all the questions. Appreciate it. If each faction has a unique energy or mana resource, would an EMP-like spell affect a faction differently?
Yeah, I mean, well, kind of. Like, it ultimately, I mean, the answer is yes and no. We can standardize effects pretty easily just by making sure that there's a pretty standard exchange rate between like 1 charge and like 15 energy or whatever. And if we work within sort of the boundaries of like EMP doesn't do a set amount of energy damage so much as it drains the enemy casters by say 50% or something or 70%, then it's very easy. How much that will affect the efficacy of each faction's caster will vary significantly, and that's okay. That means that there's more textured matchups, there's sharper matchups, and there's softer matchups, and that's just part of the discovery that makes this kind of open-ended strategy game so good and compelling.
Thank you so much for the question, Shining118. Apocalypse asks, and I think we have time for just a couple more questions. Apocalypse asks, how's Aru's access to healing? Can they pull out their own blood and at the same time get healed up for some free blood real estate?
So not real. Well, kind of. So they do not have something like a medic or a medevac. If you want that, you actually want to pair them up with either the Joran Doc or the Karathi Magi. One of their interesting things is when they're away from their route way, when unless you are Mala is the way that you get to bend this rule for cost, you don't have combat healing. Mala will let you have combat healing, but it will literally cost you a unit. She will just dab a unit and it dies, and then all of its blood is converted into sort of this geyser of healing energy for a short period of time. So and that's on a fairly, significant cooldown. You have to really pick and choose when you want to do that. And there's, it costs Pyre. So there's opportunity costs with, infused troops and other things you could be doing. So one of the neat things about Aru is they have these sort of two modes. They have these like going out on a hunt and murdering something. And then there's this sort of recovery or defensive phase where they go gather around a blood well, hang out on route way, increase their regeneration, and rest up for the next hunt. So there's a very real cadence to playing Aru that the shape of that is altered by whatever immortal you're playing.
Cool stuff. Cool stuff. Sorry, no free blood real estate, but lots of teamwork opportunities and interesting things to be done.
Yep.
And always consider that there may be an immortal that comes out that breaks the rule or the trend that you're used to for a particular faction. That's kind of always a possibility, which is very exciting. All right. Psycho Spammer is asking any info on when Alpha might be. Alpha will be Q4 this year. We'll be in the last quarter of this year. If we can get it to you sooner, we absolutely will. Everyone's going kind of nuts all the time, working super hard to get all these features and games and stuff out for you. So let's take a moment, thank all the coders and the artists and the people making this game right now. A lot of them in the chat right now. Appreciate you guys. Critical stuff. It's awesome to be able to just sit here and point at your awesome work and say thank you. It's just the best. But yeah, alpha is that time. Q4. Once we get closer, we might have like an actual date, but not just yet.
Playtesting is ramping up. So
playtesting's ramped. We're almost at 400 playtesters at this point, and playtesting will be coming to Twitch on June 12th. So mark your calendars. We'll have some people that you may recognize streaming the video game.
They have in fact played games before.
And games that you might also like as well. You might like the games that they play. They might be somewhat related to the game that we're making. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Just some ideas. We'll see. We'll see what happens. All right. You know what? Yeah, this will be the last question. What is the lifespan of a Sylph?
Well, it depends on which Sylph. So Iratech have a very different sort of life cycle than Aru because Aru are much closer to an animal in our experience, a social animal like humans, than Iratech are. Iratech, you have these individuals that are literally sutured together like different personalities and memories and skill sets to best serve the society. And then those are literally kind of downloaded into a pre-grown fabricated body to serve, whether it is cultivation of land, arms manufacturing, exploration, military exercises, whatever. Aru are individuals that are born sort of naturally. They're sexually dimorphic as opposed to the Aru, to the Iratech or the Yule. And so they have a radically different experience in terms of, they grow, they mature, they eventually start, entering into relationships, they have kids, and, they grow old and then they die. With Aru, though, they tend to not grow old. That they have a very active very dangerous lifestyle. The Iratek have these sort of they have this sort of slow and steady colonization approach to settling this continent, where they very slowly, methodically, like chase out all the life forms that would be problematic for their society and integrate the ones as like livestock or whatever that are useful. Aru just sort of like go, well, wherever there's trees, like we're going out and hunting. And it turns out there's a lot of things to hunt on Nuoth that are pretty formidable and dangerous. If any of you guys play Subnautica, that's a game that is a constant source of inspiration. Aru, as mighty as they are not necessarily the top of the food chain. And they're constantly kind of pushing against Nuoth, and Nuoth is constantly pushing back against them.
Yeah, I love the stories that come out of the chaotic world that is Nuoth. It's fantastic stuff.
Yeah, we'll hopefully be, if you guys want a little bit more of a hands-on, we will probably be doing kind of a Monster Hunter pen and paper role-playing game set on the Forbidden Continent of Modslan with a bunch of Aru.
Nice. Yeah,
so
we did our first pen and paper RPG. You can check it out on our YouTube channel. In the Immortal universe, run by our own Donovan, the lad himself. So I had a really fun time hanging out, producing for that, and watching the show. The cast is amazing. We got Mrs. Harvey, we got Neuro, got Ash Plissikin. I'm hopefully saying that ID correctly. And then we had a couple of Sunspear folks as well. I had no idea the character playing ability of our two New Zealander employees, but
the brothers Sutherland killed it. They were great.
Oh man!
Shout out to Neuro as well.
Yeah,
and,
definitely.
Harvey. Yeah.
Definitely. So many awesome people.
It was just perfect.
In the community.
Chemistry could not have been better.
Yes, I love especially the Ash Neuro chemistry going on. They've both had similar kind of like wild characters. They were just
they played off of each other very well.
Let's go.
Took me 12 seconds.
Oh yeah. Well, that's it for today. We're gonna close up the show with we're gonna go back to the full video in case you missed it at the beginning. This is fresh stuff from us, and it'll be up on YouTube shortly. Certainly go check it out. We'll also be having a little tournament going on the Discord server. So make sure you join into the Discord server and take a look at what's going on. That'll be happening actually in just a few minutes.
Is the Seoshin live in that build?
Yeah, she is.
Awesome. Yeah, so Seoshin is one of Ajari's first Vanguard. So the Karoth versus Karoth versus Karoth versus Karoth matchups will actually now be pretty distinct. So get in, whack people.
All right. Thank you all for tuning in and hang out. We'll be back. Actually, we'll just be back next week. Tune in next week. We have a stream every week. You can hang out, and we'll see you guys there. Have a good one.
Later, guys.
Karoth differs from Aru in that Karoth is sort of the hammer and anvil approach, where a lot of their siege troops are a little bit more mobile, where Aru is the complete opposite. They have this polarity between having a bunch of hyper-aggressive, fragile troops combined with some very, very positional tools that like to entrench into an area.
So Mala and Zol are these two really iconic characters that really hammer home sort of the twin spirits of what it is to be Aru. Mala can sacrifice her own units to radically increase healing in a given area, and her Bloodwell structure can actually harvest the life force of units that die nearby, giving her Pyre and sort of building up to her transcendent ult ability, which literally makes the sky bring blood. So Zol, on the other hand, embodies the more predatory hunter elements of Aru. She swaps out the masked hunter for this sort of super stalker, this bone stalker, that brings stealth combat and ambushing into the early game in a really compelling way. All of her units can see into the fog of war a bit. They have that sort of tremor sense, or that sort of sixth hunter's sense that really lets a skilled Zol player be one step ahead of the opponent at any given time.
Definitely the most exciting thing about Aru will be their contrasting playstyle, where they're going to have a lot of fragile troops that are very mobile, and you're able to run around the map pretty effectively with more of a hit and run and ambush style, skulking around the map, finding targets of opportunity, and they're able to follow it with Aru's ability to just completely lock down and entrench into an area with their roots.
So what's really cool about Rootway is that it's a very visual representation of the Arus and their goddesses' influence encroaching on the battlefield. And there's some really cool visual effects that we're working on to really deliver that fantasy.
The Aru has lower mana regeneration than most factions do when they're off Rootway. And then they want to make sure they're on Rootway to make sure they have extra mana regeneration. So they're really tied to making sure they want to come back and stay on their Rootway whenever they want to have their maximum mana regeneration for their casters. Which kind of ties into them being able to cast from life if they ever find themselves in a situation without mana. As another part of their gameplay, they have an overshield, which regenerates very, very quickly, but only once they haven't been fighting for a little bit. So when their Aru troops are on the Rootway, they regenerate their shields a lot faster.
I think one of the really cool sort of workhorse units we have in Immortal is the Underspine, which really kind of, it's similar to the Magi in the sense that it kind of turns on the rest of your early compositions, but it scales really well into the late game. And what's cool about it is it's a deploy-only unit, so it can move around, and then when you deploy it, becomes hidden and starts attacking things. Basically, it's this nasty hermit crab bobbit worm creature that will just really mangle anything that gets too close to it while providing rootway for your forces.
Where the Underspine represents the positional nature of the Root Witches, the Aru, the Bloodbound is the complete opposite. This is the assassin, or more mobile force in the Aru, where they are very fragile, but they are glass cannons and have extreme damage. And they are also able to teleport someone. And whenever you've teleported somewhere, if there's a unit that you've teleported right on top of, they basically get nuked and assassinated for a crazy amount of damage.
I think people are going to love how Aru soldiers and warriors and hunters look and kind of stand out as this sort of living predatory foliage or sort of treant people. We have some really iconic characters, shapes, and sort of textures and palettes that we're kind of bringing to the fore in a way that I don't think any other strategy game has done. So we're definitely treading on unique ground here.